Whenever a new camera enters my hands, there's one test I never skip: taking it out into the night for long exposures. There's something magical about seeing how a sensor behaves when it's pushed to its limits under darkness. The Hasselblad X2D II was no exception. I mounted the 20 to 35mm E lens and headed into the Swiss mountains to see how this combination would perform under starlit skies. Interestingly, the E on this lens stands for exclusive, and only two lenses in Hasselblad's lineup currently carry it: the 20 to 35mm and the 35 to 100mm zooms. Both are part of a new generation of optics designed for the X and V systems, and I was eager to see how they handled extended night exposures. When shooting long exposures, I always go full manual. That means tripod, low ISO, and complete control over exposure time and aperture. With the X2D II, the base ISO has changed from 64 on the Mark I to 50 on this model. It might sound like a small difference, but it matters. Shooting at ISO 50 ensures the cleanest signal from the sensor: no amplification, no noise creeping in. That's exactly what you want when you're stretching exposures beyond several minutes. Focus settings also play a crucial role. For my night landscape shots, I switched off subject detection entirely. There's no need for that when you're photographing mountains and valleys. I started in autofocus single mode just to lock in a distant focal point before switching to manual focus. It's a workflow I've used for years, but something curious happened this time that's worth sharing. In the absolute blackness of night, my autofocus, which initially worked flawlessly, began to fail. It wasn't just struggling, it was focusing incorrectly. When I focused on distant lights, expecting the focus to land at infinity, the scale showed that it was actually short of infinity. The result? Blurry images, even though the focus confirmation light and beep told me everything was fine. I confirmed this by recording a short clip while operating the camera with one hand and my iPhone in the other. The footage wasn't pretty, but it proved the point. In total darkness, the autofocus system tends to misjudge the infinity point. The solution is simple: switch to manual focus. Once I did that, I used the focus ring to fine-tune my shot. The X2D's display includes a distance scale, and it's crucial to watch it closely. The trick is to bring the indicator just to the very edge of the infinity mark, not beyond it. If you rotate the ring too far, you'll overshoot and soften the image again. It's a delicate touch, but it makes all the difference. Once that tiny mark sits perfectly at the end of the scale, the focus is locked, and your stars, mountains, and city lights will all appear razor sharp. Now let's talk about long exposure settings. Many new users might get confused when they scroll through shutter speeds and suddenly see bulb mode appear after 1 second. That doesn't mean you're limited to 1-second exposures. Keep turning the control wheel. After bulb, you'll find T mode, and from there, you can extend shutter times to minutes, even beyond 10 minutes if you like. The X2D II was designed for this kind of photography. It can handle multi-minute exposures with surprising stability and almost no sensor noise at base ISO. On that night in the Swiss Alps, I pushed it well past the 10-minute mark for some of the shots, and the files that came out were astonishingly clean and detailed. The sensor's dynamic range over 15 stops gave me immense flexibility during post-processing. Even when the raw image appeared nearly black, I could lift the shadows several stops in Lightroom without introducing noise or banding. That's the true test of a medium format sensor. The first image from that session was a 128-second exposure at f5.6 and ISO 50, shot at 20mm. The scene included winding mountain roads illuminated by tiny moving car lights, farmhouses tucked into the dark landscape, and the faint trails of stars overhead. Straight out of camera, the photo was nearly black, with only a few visible light trails. But after brightening it in post, the transformation was striking. The roads glowed like veins of light across the mountains, the texture of the grass and trees emerged, and the overall sharpness remained pristine. It was a perfect demonstration of the camera's tonal depth. Of course, long exposures at night come with their own challenges, and one of them is hot pixels. These are bright, isolated dots that appear on the image when the sensor heats up during extended exposure times. It's a physical inevitability. Every camera, regardless of brand or price, will exhibit hot pixels if the sensor gets warm enough. I've seen it on Leica, Sony, Nikon, Fuji, and now Hasselblad. The important thing is to know how to deal with them. In Lightroom, you can remove hot pixels manually with the healing or remove tool, but that's a painfully slow process, especially if you've got hundreds of them scattered across an image. In my upcoming video, I'll dive deep into smarter, automated ways to eliminate them quickly. For now, it's enough to understand that hot pixels don't mean your camera is defective. They're a completely normal byproduct of physics when shooting long exposures. One of my 10-minute shots at 35mm and f5.6 showed a beautiful valley illuminated by village lights, but when I zoomed in, I noticed several hot pixels sprinkled across the image. You can see them in the darker mountain areas, tiny red or white specks. They're easy to miss at full view but become obvious at 100% magnification. Again, this doesn't ruin the shot, it just means some cleanup is needed in post. The image itself was breathtaking: long star trails sweeping across the sky, glowing roads winding through the mountains, and the faint texture of grass and forest still visible despite the extreme exposure time. Later that night, I took another 323-second exposure after the sensor had been working for quite a while. At that point, the number of hot pixels increased significantly. I marked each one during review, and there were dozens, maybe hundreds. Manually fixing all of them would take forever, which is why I strongly recommend learning how to automate that process. It saves enormous time and preserves your sanity when you're working with multiple long exposure frames. Not every long exposure has to be extreme, though. One of my favorite shots from that session was taken with a 64-second exposure under a half moon. The moonlight illuminated the landscape beautifully, casting gentle shadows and giving the scene a painterly look. The bright moon itself was, of course, overexposed, but that's to be expected. The resulting image featured crisp detail in the barn, subtle light trails from passing cars, and remarkable tonal gradation in the forest and mountain textures. Even with blown-out highlights, the image retained incredible depth. Throughout all these experiments, one thing became very clear: the Hasselblad X2D II is an outstanding camera for night photography. The files are incredibly robust, the tonal range is massive, and even at base ISO, the images remain completely noise-free even after aggressive post-processing. Combined with the new 20 to 35mm E lens, the sharpness and micro contrast are exceptional. The lens resolves incredible detail, even wide open, and maintains edge-to-edge consistency that's rare in zoom lenses. But perhaps the most important takeaway from this entire experience is that long exposure photography requires a thoughtful workflow. Start by switching to manual mode, select ISO 50, and use a sturdy tripod. Keep subject detection off, focus manually near infinity, and avoid touching the camera during exposure. Be patient and experiment with different shutter durations. Once you've nailed your focus and exposure, the results can be breathtaking: smooth star trails, glowing roads, detailed mountains, and a serene, cinematic mood that no daylight shot can replicate. Hot pixels and autofocus quirks aside, the Hasselblad X2D II proved itself to be a powerhouse for extended night shooting. It handled exposures of over 10 minutes without breaking a sweat, and the resulting images were full of life, clarity, and depth. It's a reminder that even in the age of fast lenses and high ISO performance, there's still something deeply rewarding about slowing down, setting up on a tripod, and letting light accumulate over time. The results speak for themselves: rich, clean, and absolutely mesmerizing. For anyone serious about landscape or night photography, this camera is a dream tool. And while there's always something new to learn, like dealing efficiently with hot pixels or mastering manual focus in complete darkness, the process is part of what makes photography so enjoyable. Each frame becomes both a technical challenge and a creative expression of patience and precision. The X2D II handles it all with grace, and if you take care to follow a few simple rules, it will reward you with images that feel almost timeless. That's the beauty of long exposure work. You're not just capturing light, you're capturing time itself. The slow crawl of car lights across winding mountain roads, the gentle drift of stars through the night sky, the subtle glow of moonlight on the landscape, all of it blends together into a single, tranquil image. The Hasselblad X2D II doesn't just record it, it celebrates it.